Hello everyone. My name is Derek Boutte, and today we are debating the zero tolerance policy. For today's debate, Kelly Kerner will be arguing for the zero tolerance policy and explaining the history and effectiveness of the policy. Stephanie Hoekstra will be arguing against zero tolerance policy and recommendations for alternatives to the policy. To support our debaters, Abby Hansen will be discussing the effects of zero tolerance, and Tiffany Thomas, who is our research expert. And finally, we have our fielder, Crystal Gibson, who will lead the debate. Zero tolerance is a policy that results in mandatory expulsion of any student who commits one or more specified offenses. For example, offenses involving guns or other weapons or violence or similar factors or combination of these factors, which emerge as a federal response to school violence. The purpose of this debate is to determine the effectiveness of zero tolerance policies and to explore the supporting evidence. The point for zero tolerance is that zero tolerance provides consistent consequences for dangerous behaviors in order to minimize disparities and deter students from committing these dangerous behaviors. The counterpoint is that there is not enough evidence to support that zero tolerance decreases dangerous behaviors. However, there is evidence to support that zero tolerance has severe negative impacts on the lives of students beyond their educational years. Why this is important is that increasing research on zero tolerance is proving insufficient in terms of reducing violence or drug abuse in schools. Instead, it's resulting in negative outcomes for schools and individuals. Zero tolerance has also shown to have a large impact on racial minorities in males, contributing to disparities in race and sex. There is a clear need to modify policies to address violence and drug abuse. New state laws are limiting long-term suspensions and expulsions and eliminating the use of zero tolerance policies altogether. And there's also emerging use of positive behavior supports in schools. To open, we have Kelly, who will be our point for zero tolerance.
Thanks, Derek. Zero tolerance provides a reliable consequence to deter students from committing very serious and dangerous behaviors in order to ensure a safe learning environment for all students.
And to introduce zero tolerance is a short video from the Washington Journal.
Hey, Abby, can you remind me where the video starts?
Yep, as soon as I go find my paper. Sorry, I thought it was in there. Thought you had it still.
I did not write it down.
How about we skip the video and then just
we
can look for that time and then we'll just do something like it.
We already know what it is. I'll write it down again.
Sounds good. Okay.
So after the video, are you just going to jump back in? Oh, no, it's Crystal.
Yeah. So thanks for the video, Abby. How and when did zero tolerance policy expand from being specifically about weapons and dangerous behaviors to including more mundane rule violations, such as the cell phone use example?
Thanks, Crystal. That's a great question. Zero tolerance really is built upon, or the importance behind zero tolerance really is built upon its history. So I think that's a really great question in understanding why zero tolerance was developed and kind of what it's turned into today, and understanding why it's effective in our schools. It was developed originally in 1980. That's where zero tolerance, the ideology behind it, started, and it began during the war on drugs in order to prevent drug trafficking and gun violence in the criminal justice system. And then we have signing of the act.
Mm-hmm. So you can just keep going, and Derek, you'll just show the picture while she's talking.
Right.
For the 1994.
Gotcha. In 1994, We have President Clinton, who had signed the Federal Guns-Free School Act of 1994, which requires all schools to expel students that bring guns into school for a minimum of at least 1 year and refer these students to the local law enforcement. Schools were forced to choose between enacting the zero tolerance policy or losing their federal funding. And there's another image.
And this image here is from the EEPA, and according to the EEPA, when this signing was presented, you can see the increase in states that implemented these expulsion laws.
And following in 1999, after we have the Columbine series, and I know I'm going to expand a little bit on talking about the Columbine events, zero tolerance, that is when zero tolerance expanded to include more things other than just guns, including possessions of anything that can be perceived as a weapon, any drugs or alcohol, any creation of sexually harassing or suggestive comments or situations, making threats of any violence in any form, and possessions or use of laser points. Abby, could you tell us about some real-world examples of how zero tolerance was applied?
Yes, I would love to. According to local St. Petersburg Times in Florida, a 10-year-old girl was expelled for having a knife in her lunchbox. And I know weapons are a huge concern, which is why this zero tolerance was started. And in addition, a 13-year-old boy was expelled because he brought a gun to school. And no family ever wants to deal with that or have to worry about their child in school and their safety. In addition, a middle schooler brought a Swiss Army knife in his backpack, and he has been expelled. So we're making sure we're keeping weapons outside of school because that's not where they belong. And lastly, with an interview with the BCBA S. Linton interview, 11-year-old boy was expelled. He did not have a diagnosis. However, was made several threats and attempts to stab other staff as well as students with school items such as pencils and paper clips. And the school did work with the child and the family as they did not have services local and were on a wait list to get some assistance. And unfortunately, after trying to make some accommodations to help this child, they had to do what was best and expel him to make sure all the kids were safe. So those are some continued suspensions and expulsions that helped keep kids safe since this act was in place. Thank you for letting me share.
Thanks, Abby. Is zero tolerance policy compatible with the BACB compliance code of ethics? If not, what could be done to make it more compatible?
Thanks, Crystal. Well, zero tolerance was built upon the deterrence theory, which suggests that there's the presence of punishment will serve to deter actors from committing future infractions. So at first appearance, this violates the BACB compliance code 4.08a, which states that behavior analysts must recommend reinforcement rather than punishment whenever possible. However, this behavior warrants more restrictive procedure. That doesn't make sense, but I'll change it. If schools are taking other appropriate steps to reinforce positive behaviors, punishment can be used and should be used as a response to these behaviors that put the student, themselves, and their peers at risk of danger. Zero tolerance is a response to an extremely dangerous behavior that puts the safety of an entire school at risk. In compliance with Code 7.202a, if a behavior analyst believes there must be a legal or ethical violation, they must determine whether there is a potential for harm, a possible legal violation, a mandatory reporting condition, or an agency, organization, or regulatory requirement addressing the violation. In this case, the possession of a weapon or drug with a potential threat to human life establishes both a potential for harm and a legal violation, which extends beyond the scope of applied behavior analysis. The American Psychological Association reports that parents overwhelmingly support the implementation of zero tolerance policies to ensure the safety of schools, and the students even feel safer knowing that these behaviors will be dealt with quickly and in no uncertain terms. Zero tolerance is a fast-acting intervention that projects the message that major offenses will not be tolerated in school under any circumstances. This policy ensures the safety of all students within a learning institution by eliminating danger and fostering a positive environment that allows for. End of the sentence there. I don't know what my thought was. Sorry.
Okay. Thanks, Kelly. So is there any data which indicates that zero tolerance policy is having a positive effect on the school environment and the students' sense of well-being?
Great question, Crystal. Can you guys hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Great question, Crystal. According to D.L. Stater, after zero tolerance was enacted, the number of students who feared attack or harm at school, quote, sometimes or most of the time, decreased from 9% in 1995 to 5% in 1999. Students aged 12 to 18 who reported avoiding certain areas of school due to safety concerns between 1995 and 1999 also decreased from 9% to 5%. This proves that zero tolerance made students' perception of safety stronger after its enactment, which is a definite success. Another immediate impact is that students in grades 9 to 12 who reported carrying a weapon on school property within the past 30 days dropped from 12% in 1993 to 7% in 1999. The percentage of students admitting to carrying a weapon in any environment during this time period also fell from 22% down to 17%. These statistics show that immediately following zero tolerance, students took their cause very seriously and decreased weapon use.
Thanks, Tiffany. Besides the benefits of a greater sense of safety and the reported decrease in students carrying weapons mentioned by Tiffany, are there any additional benefits to zero tolerance policy?
Yes, there's definitely multiple benefits that results from zero tolerance. Zero tolerance sends a very clear message of expectations and consequences that hold a student and their parents accountable for the behavior of the student. This policy not only gains the parent attention, but it also includes their active involvement in their child's behavior. Consequences such as suspension or expulsion remove the threat from the school environment, and it allows parents to become more aware and involved in their child's life. Oh, I forgot to finish this part. Additionally, suspension and expulsion, I was going to say, removes the child from the environment and allows them a new environment in order to impact their behavior. I'll reword that. Zero tolerance policy prepares young people for the real world, how to exist in contemporary society. Part of socialization in society is understanding that for certain crimes, one is removed from society or incarcerated. This policy teaches students the expectations held by police officers, bosses, and others of authority in society. There is zero tolerance for many aspects of life, for example, weapon use, sexual harassment, and others. Zero tolerance develops students into law-abiding citizens. Additionally, zero tolerance reduces favoritism because there is no room for subjectivity. Any student who commits an act of violence or crime, as defined by the zero tolerance policy, will be held to the same consequences as that of their peers. The punishment is based upon the violation the student committed, not upon the individual. Removing bias from the process maintains compliance with the BACB Code 1.05D. Behavior analysts do not engage in discrimination against individuals or groups based on age, gender, race, culture, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, disability, language, socioeconomic status, or any basis prescribed by law. Political gains, oh, I didn't do that one. I might not do that one. Zero tolerance can be used in a system of multi-tiered discipline or systems that focus on restorative justices prior to the use of exclusionary discipline. Areas of concerns that people have on zero tolerance can be eliminated by increased standardization training for staff of how and when zero tolerance is appropriate to remove subjectivity. Developing an operational definition for behavior that warrants the use of zero tolerance, eliminating any non-examples such as bringing toenail clippers or aspirin to school, and embedding zero tolerance as a last resort or extreme circumstances only.
Thanks, Kelly. As stated, the goal of zero tolerance was the reduction of violence in schools or at school-sponsored events. This goal is heroic, and more research has been done since its enactment that identifies other recommendations to combat violence at school. Authors P. Mongan and R. Walker shared 3 recommendations moving forward regarding the implementation of zero tolerance. The first recommendation is that, quote, administrators should require mens reas for expulsion. Mens reas means that a student was aware of the weapon prior to their punishment. The second recommendation is that, quote, other staff should be included in the expulsion process. This helps to determine guilt and severity of a threat without fear of being solely responsible. Making one or two staff members solely in charge of deciding a student's fate is a lot of pressure, and it can raise questions of favoritism or prejudice toward that student. The third recommendation is to conduct a threat assessment to identify the level of homicidal threat that a student possesses. BACB Code 3.01 states that assessments must be done prior to making recommendations regarding treatment. This code should be followed when deciding consequences in school as well. These three recommendations can make zero tolerance as effective as it was meant to be.
Thanks, Tiffany. So it was mentioned that after the Federal Gun-Free Schools Act of 1994, schools were forced to choose between enacting the zero tolerance policy or lose federal education dollars. Are there any penalties that exist today that would prevent schools from moving away from the zero tolerance policy?
Derek, go ahead.
Do we want to remove that question? I don't know if it makes sense there.
Why don't we put a question mark and then
Find a place for it later or see where.
Yeah.
because I had another one that I wasn't sure on.
Okay. So
What
we'll
are
find the.
at for time, by the way?
Well, we
We're at-
are 16:20.
Yes, we're good.
So we're doing good. We're doing well.
Good deal.
Okay, so we'll put that question in a new location.
I'll highlight it.
Okay. So thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Crystal. We're going to move on to the counterpoint for zero tolerance, which will be Stephanie Hoekstrup. And we're going to start by a video. Abby, would you like to introduce our video?
Yes, I have a great video by KPBS News, and it goes into the zero tolerance policy impact that it has had on schools. Although it was for great intentions, it does kind of look at another side of it, like Crystal asked.
Okay.
And I don't know if this one's set up in the right time. Actually, you were right, Derek. It is from the beginning.
Yes, I wrote down this one.
Okay.
Can't hear it.
Can we hear it?
I hear you.
Oh, man. Hiccup.
I don't know how to do this part, so I can't help you.
Let's see.
Derek, did you open it with using the app?
No, it is just embedded into the PowerPoint, which may be part of the
I was going to say,
thing.
you might want to do the application window. Because it says you can share your entire screen or just the application window.
Right. I wasn't sure how to do that. How do I?
It says the screen share button on the side.
And I see application window, but how do I?
An application window, then you pick which
Ho, ho,
application.
ho, ho, ho. Ho, ho.
The only downside is that it shows the whole application, but
Is it better now?
yeah, now we see the whole thing. All right, how about we just continue for a time and maybe me and you can, Derek, you can meet up and maybe
Okay.
figure out the kinks of that.
All
Okay,
right.
so. All right. So thank you for the video, Abby. So now to introduce the counterpoint for zero tolerance will be Stephanie Hoekstrup.
Thank you, Derek. Zero tolerance has many issues, including lack of economical sustainability, unreasonable consequences, mistreatment of students with mental illness, disabilities, or minority students, perpetuating the school-to-prison pipeline, and even infringing upon amendments. However, there are some data that proves that there are successful alternatives. And here's Abby with statement 3.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yes, annually, high school students with disabilities of any sort are nearly 3 times more likely to receive an out-of-school suspension compared to high school students with disabilities. And that's according to a generation later that we've learned about zero tolerance.
Another issue of zero tolerance is that the consequences are not fitting for offenses. And here's Abby with some real-life scenarios.
Thank you, Stephanie. I have several examples which kind of look at an opposite side of zero tolerance that may seem a little too extreme, and some of you may agree or disagree with. According to CBS News, excuse me, According to CBS News, a 13-year-old was suspended for wearing rosary beads. After looking into it more, he was wearing that was from his grandparent that passed away because it could be perceived as gang attire. And a middle school boy was suspended for trying to help a suicidal friend and successfully was able to prevent injury to that individual by taking the knife from them and did report it to the school. According to the ABA Journal on Zero Tolerance, a 5-year-old was suspended because they brought a bubble gun to school, which developmentally it's appropriate for a 5-year-old to have a bubble gun. You know, what kid didn't like to play bubbles when they were 5 years old? According to the St. Petersburg Times, as Crystal kind of mentioned on it earlier, an individual was suspended for talking on the phone with their parent that was deployed overseas because their school policy was that they did not use cell phone use during school. However, that's a situation that needs to be looked into further. A 5-year-old had found a razor blade on a school bus and picked it up to see what it was, and it was actually property of the school system, but the child was suspended. And across the country, there's several use of zero tolerance does not fit offenses. And some of them include items that you can find in your everyday household cabinet, such as cough syrup and allergy medicine and nail clippers, and the list goes on. So there's several sides to zero tolerance, except this side doesn't seem as appealing as they intended it to be. Back to you, Stephanie.
Thanks. There are no positive guidelines for appropriate behavior, so it does not utilize positive reinforcement at all. This goes against Compliance Code 4.08, Considerations Regarding Punishment Procedures. Behavior analysts recommend reinforcement rather than punishment whenever possible. If punishment procedures are necessary, behavior analysts always include reinforcement procedures for alternative behavior in the behavior change program. Punishment can also be negatively reinforcing to the person implementing the concept or the punishment. And also, the consequences are not reasonable in zero tolerance. And here's Abby with this statistic.
And again, according to Generation Later, an estimated 2 million students annually are suspended from a secondary school. And in comparison, slightly more than 3 million students graduated high school in 2013.
Zero tolerance overuses aversive consequences and has led to children running away or becoming aggressive. Schools that have low reports of disruptive behavior are not implementing zero tolerance. And here's Abby with another statistic.
According to A Generation Later, a single suspension or expulsion doubles the risk of a student repeating a grade. And in turn, the lasting consequences is possible dropouts, limited employment, or even limited income. So it has a drastic effect lifelong, even outside of that time they were in school.
When students are expelled or suspended, they are denied access to educational opportunities. This goes against Compliance Code 4.09. Behavior analysts review and appraise the restrictiveness of procedures and always recommend the least restrictive procedure likely to be effective. The idea that one punishment works for all misbehaviors is flawed, and we as future behavior analysts reject this idea. The one-size-fits-all approach, which fails to accommodate the fact that some of the behaviors demonstrated by students with disabilities are beyond their control. This goes against Compliance Code 4.03. Behavior analysts must tailor behavior change programs to the unique behaviors, environmental variables, assessment results, and goals of each client. Many students that are not actually imposing real danger to their school environment end up being severely punished through zero tolerance. School governance and the principal of each school play a large role in determining the consequences of misbehavior, rather than the student's behavior. This is poor treatment fidelity of zero tolerance, since it is utilized so inconsistently across the country. Zero tolerance is also not fair to students with mental illness, disabilities, or minority students. In fact, many argue that zero tolerance has become a vehicle to push unwanted students out of school. This goes against Compliance Code 7.01, Promoting an Ethical Culture. Behavior analysts promote an ethical culture in their work environments and make others aware of this code. Zero tolerance perpetuates the school-to-prison pipeline by punishing minor offenses and then taking students out of school and pushing them into the justice system. There is a high disparity in suspension and expulsion rates of minority students, as Black student suspension and expulsion rates are typically 2 to 3 times higher than the rates of other students. In a study by the Civil Rights Project at UCLA, it was discovered that schools enacting zero tolerance suspended almost twice as many students with disabilities than they did students without disabilities. And here's Abby with some images.
Thank you, Stephanie. You brought up some great parts, so just go right into the images that I have. Thank you, Derek, for pulling that up. That wasn't the one. It's the one with the graph. The next one, slide 11.
Is this the right one?
Nope, slide 11. One more. But I can. It's an image. It's okay. According to the graph for the EEPA, you can see that the suspensions.
Oh, it's not showing. Sorry, Abby.
Oh, you're fine. It happens. We'll figure it out. It shows the student suspension by race. And as you can see by looking at the image, there's a high increase in individuals of Hispanic or Black race that have increased suspensions across the beginning of zero tolerance on, as you can see by the graph. And the next image that you scroll to, according to the Institute of Justice, middle school students of Black youth are suspended nearly 4 times more often than white youth, and Latino youth are roughly twice as likely to be suspended or expelled than white youth. So it is clearly imbalanced. Back to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Abby. Compliance Code 1.05 states, in their work-related activities, behavior analysts do not engage in discrimination against individuals or groups based on age, gender, race, culture, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, disability, language, socioeconomic status, or any basis prescribed by law. Zero tolerance can often be an obstruction of the 14th Amendment, which calls for due process of all American citizens. Many others claim that zero tolerance goes against the 8th Amendment as well, as zero tolerance perpetuates overly cruel and unusual punishment. This goes against Compliance Code 7.02, ethical violations by others and risk of harm B. If a client's legal rights are being violated, or if there is potential for harm, behavioral analysts must take the necessary action to protect the client, including but not limited to contacting relevant authorities, following organizational policies, and consulting with appropriate professionals. There is an alternative, though, positive behavior supports, which is a behavior change model that focuses on providing support to students as a preventative measure. It has 3 different levels, each based on the support, depending on what the students need. And so PBS builds on the fundamentals of ABA, which is an evidence-based practice that utilizes 3-term contingency. And then here is, Abby, we're skipping statistic 4 here, right? Or is
yes, because I already used it.
Okay, I'm just going to delete this here then.
Yes.
And then here is Tiffany with some more information.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie. So zero tolerance affects more than just the school setting. Regarding how zero tolerance affects students' home life, P. Mongan and R. Walker wrote that, quote, at minimum, it could be argued that long-term suspension or expulsion would affect attachment in one of 2 ways. Either it could add strain to a family unit, or it could expose students to increased time in an environment that already lacks attachment. When a student is expelled, they may be sent to an environment with no support, lack of basic needs, abuse, or absentee parenting. The authors cite Terrace et al., which discusses the effect of suspension and expulsion on students, and reported that, quote, children most likely to be suspended or expelled are those most in need of adult supervision and professional help. Research suggests that the use of suspension does not decrease future misbehaviors and has negative consequences for the students who are suspended.
All right, thank you, guys. Tiffany.
Yep.
Is it Crystal from here?
Yep.
Sorry. So what kinds of measures have been taken to evaluate the effectiveness of zero tolerance policy?
Is this mine, guys?
Tiffany.
Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
I think I must have got lost or something going through.
It happened to me too.
Okay. According to author S. Martinez, while zero tolerance was enacted to keep schools safer, there have been other side effects. According to R. Wald, quote, in 1974, 1.7 million students were suspended from school. By 1998, the number of suspended students increased to 3.1 million. This increase does not directly correlate to zero tolerance, but due to the fact that the policy was initiated between these 2 years, it is possible to assume that there is some sort of correlation. Raising suspension rates was not the goal of zero tolerance. When identifying the goal of zero tolerance as decreasing violence, it would make sense to identify murder rates in school settings. This may be the most crucial data point to prove or disprove zero tolerance. However, this data is inconclusive. According to authors P. Mongan and R. Walker, quote, the number of homicides at school in the 2 years before the enactment of zero tolerance was 34 and 29 students respectively. The year after zero tolerance was enacted, the student homicide rate was 34 students. Then, a major decrease in student homicides occurred after the 1998-1999 year, and homicides for the 1999 to 2000 year hit a low of 14. The authors agree that this data fluctuates too much to yield any results that are interpretable. BACB Code 1.01, Reliance on Scientific Knowledge, states that there must be reliable scientific knowledge to support any policy or procedure used with a client. Because of this, zero tolerance should not be enforced by behavior analysts because there is little to no data to support its use.
Okay, thank you, Tiffany. So positive behavior support, also known as PBS, has been suggested as an alternative to the punishment-based procedure of zero tolerance. Is this a feasible option?
This is mine, right?
Yes.
I know I passed it. Okay, and I know I took a little bit different here. So PBS does have its downfalls as well. So it's not proven to be not economically sustainable or logically feasible to maintain as a permanent fixture within the infrastructure of a school behavior management system. A study done by McIntosh et al. Did not discover a correlation between funding and school sustainability. In fact, schools with less funding but school priority and team use of data were able to sustain the practice. On the contrary, schools with funding but without a functioning support team were not able to sustain the practice. Sustainability depends on the individuals maintaining the practice and the team practice. And the team. If the team functions well, then school-wide positive behavior supports can be sustained, and if the team does not function well, they cannot be sustained. PBS leads to changes in behavior, but the behavior and attitudes are imposed onto the students. The students are not involved in the process of the intervention. This ultimately violates the BACB Code 4.02, which is involving clients in planning and consent, that states behavior analysts involve the client in planning. That's not necessary. PBS is designed and implemented entirely by teachers and the faculty member of whom may not be educated or properly trained to implement such designs. Additionally, PBS creates a culture across student body that may not represent the actual culture of the students or the school. PBS strips the students of their independence, which violates the core principle of ABA, respect autonomy, and benefit others. I'm going to change that a lot, but I just love that word.
Okay, thank you. So in summary, supporters of zero tolerance argue that it provides clearly defined, consistent consequences for dangerous behaviors in the school setting. It is said to provide a sense of safety and to be fair and unbiased, since the same rules apply to any student who breaks the rules. Conversely, critics of the zero tolerance policy argue that there is not enough evidence to demonstrate the efficacy of the policy, and that there is actually evidence to suggest that it has led to the mistreatment of marginalized populations, such as minorities and those with mental and physical disabilities.
Perfect. And then we'll go to questions.
Okay.
And then,
So from there, it's Tiffany.
no, it's Crystal's
It's
question.
your-
Crystal still asked the questions.
Oh yeah,
Predictions, Crystal.
sorry, I didn't see my little pink label, and I'm like, okay, so is there particular research that has looked at the zero tolerance policy as it relates to special education and disability?
Yes, there is. Not a lot, but there's something. A study done in Ohio in the 2010-2011 academic years indicated that learners with emotional disorders had 7.2 times increased the possibility of getting a suspension when compared to those without any disability. Moreover, the learners with cognitive incapacities had 2.5 times increased chances of getting a suspension than those without any disability.
Okay, and does anyone have a personal experience related to this topic that you'd like to share?
Actually, I do. I previously taught in a 6th and 7th grade middle school inclusion setting, and the school used PBIS with multi-tiered levels of intervention to support the student learning, and also applied zero tolerance policy for a set of clearly defined behaviors. So if the student exhibited any maladaptive behavior, the behavior was defined and then categorized as a minor infraction or a major infraction. Once the behavior was categorized, a student filled out a reflection sheet, and then we have the visual for the reflection sheet. And once then the student fills out the sheet, and a natural consequence is determined, or zero tolerance is applied if necessary. So this really combines both PBIS and also implements zero tolerance, and proves that it is effective because it still keeps schools safe while it doesn't just, I don't know how to word this yet, but basically kick out any student for minor infractions. It actually works to heal minor infractions and provide consequences that match the, I don't know, can't figure it out yet. Didn't finish typing it. We'll finish typing it. All done.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. So it's important to remember that punishment can be negatively reinforcing to the person implementing the punishment. For example, when a parent yells at a child to be quiet and the child quiets down, then the aversive stimuli of the loud child is removed from the parent. If this increases the likelihood of the parent yelling at the child in the future, then yelling is negatively reinforcing to the parent while punishing the child. Given this dynamic, what strategies can be put into place to help ensure that punishment is not overused or misused?
There are actually quite a few strategies that we've come up with. First of all, you could provide adequate training to ensure that teachers have the tools to respond to behavior appropriately and are reinforced for responding to students. This could be done by increasing the use of positive reinforcement in the classroom for positive behavior. This has been shown to prevent misbehavior and even reduce dropout and suspension rates. The positive behavior displayed by the students will be more reinforcing than the negative reinforcement that teachers experience when punishing their students. Schools could also create systems so that teachers and staff are noticed and reinforced by staff for responding appropriately to behavior. Ideas such as teacher bucks, in which teachers reward one another for responding to students based on function. Again, the positive reinforcement is greater than the negative reinforcement of punishing students. Schools could also train teachers in social instructional approaches so that they can help students find alternative ways to resolve conflict outside of fighting and crime. Teachers will escape the aversive consequences that result when students fight and conflict escalates. Schools could also train teachers to utilize restorative practices in their classrooms. This places the responsibility for resolution on the students, as students are expected to repair the damage they've caused to the school, community, and peer-teacher relationship. This uses behavioral practices such as role-playing, feedback, and modeling. Lastly, schools could create systems that make punishment harder to implement, such as more paperwork for suspending or expelling students.
So these are all really great points. According to the Indicators of School Crime and Safety report, quote, weapon possession in the total student population decreased from 12% in 1993 to 6% in 1999. That result suggests that zero-tolerance weapon policy may be an effective deterrent. This decrease in weapon possession is promising. However, when data is separated into gender, the percentage is skewed. Weapon possession only dropped from 5% to 4% for female offenders. Therefore, it is possible that this policy only affects male offenders or affects them more than female offenders, which means it's not effective across all settings. Another interesting statistic refers to the percentage of students that were injured or threatened. According to P. Mongan and R. Walker, quote, from 1993 to 2009, the percentage of students injured or threatened went from 7% to 9%. This result appears to contradict the decrease in weapons, but raises the argument. Does fewer weapons lead to more threats? At best, zero tolerance is not supported by data and is potentially causing more harm than good based on statistics alone. An alternative to zero tolerance policies is for schools to take a proactive stance, focusing on the prevention of violence through comprehensive approaches to improve school climate. According to M. Lazinski, A. Katsianis, J. Ryan, and C. Bond, schools have been encouraged and supported in replacing reactive discipline plans that rely solely on negative consequences for rule infractions. Prevention approaches often address discipline on multiple levels, including A. General practices designed to prevent disruptive and violent behaviors in all students, and B. More specific practices tailored for individual students who are more likely to or have already demonstrated disruptive or violent behaviors. And then what was the final decision? Am I reading this last one, or is Crystal?
I believe it was Crystal, right?
Okay.
I mean, I can.
Okay.
Unless we don't want to do that. It's
Well,
totally
no, there's just some concern about it not being my work or something. I don't really.
I don't care one bit. Read away, girlfriend.
Okay, I kind of lost where we were. The last paragraph, right? Or the last two?
So the goal of zero tolerance.
Okay. The goal of zero tolerance is admirable and agreeable among most, if not all. However, implementation must be considered amongst different schools. According to Vidal Castro, all school districts across the United States should revisit their zero tolerance policies. School districts should review criteria for reporting behavior issues to law enforcement, explain what constitutes a serious threat, and explain what constitutes a minor act of delinquency. Vidal Castro also recommends setting up a leadership team to focus on this form of discipline. CACB Code 4.08 considerations regarding punishment procedures should be considered when discussing this topic. Behavior analysts recommend reinforcement rather than punishment whenever possible. If punishment procedures are necessary, behavior analysts always include reinforcement for alternative behavior in the behavior change program. By expelling any student through zero tolerance with little discussion of the gray area of the policy, students are being punished without any sort of reinforcement or teaching alternative behaviors.